Today we are going to be talking about storyboarding contingencies in your tabletop role-playing game. And while we go through this video, I want to hear from you, so put your comments down below. Let me know, what is your process for planning your story beats? How do you stay flexible when your players go off script? And what is the wildest detour your party's ever taken, and how did you roll with it? Drop those chaos stories down in the comments, and I promise I'll try to read every single one of them while I'm pretending to prep for my next campaign. Let's get to it.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back everyone to Dungeon Brew. Today we're going to be talking about collaborative storytelling, which sounds really wholesome until you realize that it means that your narrative is actually a group project and the people you're working with think that seducing the villain's pet, which is an owlbear, is actually a reasonable plan. But specifically, we're going to be talking about contingency storyboarding today, and it's really just a fancy way of saying, what do I do when my players say yes? What do I do when my players say no? And what happens when they stab the merchant and set fire to the town square? And you do need to know what you're going to do, because they are probably going to do that. You have to at least pretend like you know what it is that you're going to do. So we're going to talk about how we as the game masters have to keep things from spiraling out of control from behind the GM screen. So let's talk about structure a little bit. Before you get into contingencies, you have to know something about just the structure of storyboarding in general. And it's not too complicated. It's really just your campaign skeleton. It's about mapping out those big moments, and I like to think about that in beats. So you think about, I have a town that's in danger, which is your first beat. Your second one is that, a stranger arrives. Your third one is that there's some secrets that are revealed. And your fourth one is that consequences unfold based on what the players choose to do. They aren't really locked in stone. They're just these signposts along the way of your quest or your campaign that say that the story should probably pass through that particular road, past those signposts, to help you visualize the flow of the story that you're telling around the table. But how do you storyboard well so you know what those road signs are that you're trying to follow? Well, I personally like to use a basic outline that is structured down, that shows me every potential option that can occur underneath each point that I have put within the plot. But maybe you like to use a comic book storyboard where you have panels that follow a progression. Maybe you're just using sticky notes or index cards. Maybe you have an elaborate murder board hung up somewhere with strings attaching all of these different ideas. But you want to make sure that you as the game master can follow your own train of thought, and that you understand what the basic layout is for that road and what the signposts are along the way. Now, once you have those beats and you understand what the story is going to look like, that's when you start talking about contingencies. Because let's be real, you can build the best story arc in the world, and you can still watch it crumble under the weight of, a perfect natural 20 on a persuasion check, or one of the party members decides they're going to adopt the villain or side with the villain, or you might just have the classic, we don't want to go into this city at all, which is something that we run into every now and then in our game, where players just sidestep the entire quest, or they're not interested in the quest and they decide they're not going to pursue it. It's important to know that you don't have to rewrite your story every time that the players go off script, so to speak. This is really about having a web of ideas instead of a railroad that you're forcing them down. So you want to give yourself options with every obstacle that you're providing for your players. If they ally with the shady noble, you know that X is going to happen. If they kill the shady noble, you know that Y is going to happen. If they kidnap a goose and accidentally start a war, cool. That's going to be a new storyline that you're going to want to start mapping out. What really matters is that you prep some branches and not dead ends for what the players choose to do. And the trick that I like to use is really reusing content. It has happened many times where players decide they don't want to go into that town, or they don't want to go into that dungeon, or they're just going to omit a particular area that I have developed and created and spent hours on because it doesn't interest them at that particular time. So, because they skipped that haunted mine that had a necromancer within, I might have that necromancer show up later with a grudge. If they kill the wrong NPCs, that's awesome. I'll have the sister show up next, and she's going to be pissed, and she's going to provide the same types of challenges for the players that NPC would have. This way you're not just throwing stuff away, you're able to recontextualize what it is that you've already created and find another place within the story. And if you want to avoid doing a lot of that hard work, one of the simplest and most effective strategies that you can utilize is just ask your players at the end of each session, where do you see your characters going next? And just 5 minutes of talking with them will keep you from spending hours scrambling later to figure out what's going on. You're going to understand their priorities, and that allows you to prep more accordingly. You're not scripting this story as much as you're just kind of preparing the scaffolding for what's going to be going on based on what the characters want to do. And here's something else that I had to learn the hard way. It is true that sometimes you need to stall because they do take the story in a different direction and you're not ready for it, and you essentially have to distract them for a little bit. You need some time to kind of prepare out what it is that they want to do exactly. So I usually have a backup dungeon or quest that I'm able to utilize to give myself some time to think about how I want to respond to the choices that they have made in the upcoming sessions that we're going to have. And while they're spending time in that side quest or that dungeon, I get to recalibrate, and I can take that time to ask myself questions. Where are my players right now, and where do they need to end up if they're interested in continuing this campaign, and what paths can I offer that give them some player agency so that they can curve backwards back to the main story that they started off with when we began this campaign. And yes, that might mean that I have to introduce an NPC or alter the political climate or drop a prophecy on them when they're having breakfast in a tavern. The point is that I'm adapting with my players and I'm not railroading them, but at the same time I'm not free falling either. So let's recap. Storyboarding is going to be about the beats that you make, not a script that's going to railroad your players. You also want to plan for choices and not just the outcomes that you want to have happen. This also means that you can reuse your content. Don't just toss it out. If they blow over something, you can bring it back again later in the story. Also, build in some stalling tactics. Have a backup dungeon or a backup quest that you can utilize and weave into the story at any given time that will give you a week or two to recalibrate. And then, of course, anchor things back into your story's core themes. You're playing dark fantasy versus high fantasy versus grimdark versus steampunk. Make sure that whatever you're utilizing is fitting the themes of that story so that you don't lose that immersion that your players have. And if you do all of that, you're going to look like a genius even when you're winging it 90% of the time. And if your players really go off the map, maybe they decide they don't want to finish the campaign the way that you planned, that's okay too. But you have to decide at what point is it a new story entirely, and where's the line between adapting and abandoning that original narrative. So that is what I have for you all today. I hope that you've enjoyed this series and that you're enjoying this episode. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, and go check out our Patreon where we have lots of free resources for game masters like you.
Dungeon